They'll be entered in.
Okay. And number two, just a technical issue. Ben Stockton did try to hook up, but he had some technical issues. So, hopefully in the future, if the IT people could put him on the mailing list to get the, official invitation, I think that would be very helpful.
Steve, we will do our best, but he was invited.
Okay. Oh, he had trouble. So, okay. Well, thank you.
We also had a sort of a test run a few days ago to avoid these situations.
Right. So anyway, that's all. Thank you.
Okay. Georgia Industrial Group, I expect the answer is the same since Clay was there on behalf of Randy. And so next up is Georgia Interfaith Power and Light in Partnership for Southern Equity.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And hello, panel, distributed panel. I'd like to begin with just a few questions about the costs that are presented for verification and approval here. And now, when you say that those dollars were prudently incurred, I just want to be sure you're not asking the commission to make a prudency determination as part of this proceeding, are you?
You're correct. We understand that we're presenting these costs to the commission as evidence of what was spent on the project during this recording period. They'll review and approve that they were spent on the project. But that prudency review for these dollars would come at the end of the project as per the order that the commission has set forward.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McKinney. And you agree that Georgia Power retains the burden of proof as to prudency in that prudency review for sums above the 5.68 that were presumed prudent previously. Is that your understanding?
That's my understanding, yes.
Now, when you say, and this is from your testimony as well, Mr. McKinney and Mr. Haswell, when you say that the investment made over the review period was that it complies with the certificate, what exactly do you mean?
Can you restate that? You broke up a little bit.
Yeah, I'm sorry. In your testimony, when you say that the investment made over the last, in the last period, that it complies with the certificate, what do you mean?
I think what we mean by that is, I mean, the commission has given us a directive to build this plan and to utilize this procedure that brings forward these costs every 6 months, and to present them to the commission for review and approval. And these dollars were spent in the company's view prudently, spent on the project, and that's what we're doing.
Okay. But you do understand the certified project cost still remains $4.4 billion.
My understanding that the original certified cost is $4.4 billion. Yeah, I mean, we do understand that. That's the basis of the NPCR tariff and the CWIP, a cap that's on CWIP for that.
Okay. All right. So next, I just wanted to ask a few questions about overall project performance and focusing specifically on total percent construction complete. And I believe in the testimony it said 79.6% total construction complete. This morning, I think I heard over 80%. Is that roughly correct? We're somewhere in the low 80s in terms of total construction percent complete?
That's correct.
And in the last VCM, the comparable figure, I believe, as of September 2019 was 73%. Do you accept that subject to check?
Subject to check.
So that would mean over the last several months, total construction complete has advanced by 7 or 8%?
Yeah, so that's why the math would work.
Okay. Do you have a figure that you want to see when you file the next report that would let us know that we're on track for the November in-service dates? In other words, would it be somebody, I think Mr. Kaczynski said before, 1% a month or something like that. And I don't mean to take that out of context if that's something different. But I mean, are you looking for something like 86% total construction complete by the next review period?
So it's good point for clarification. And I think Mr. Kaczynski went this route in the earlier session. The total construction percent complete that you're referencing at 80% is for direct construction on Unit 3, Unit 4, and subcontract construction. When we file our exhibits in the VCM proceedings, a lot of it is tied to direct construction complete. And so we file direct construction complete for Unit 3, for Unit 4, and typically subcontract percent complete follows along with that. So it's a good proxy. So the next VCM cycle, we'll probably file something that says, hey, here's where we are on Unit 3 direct construction to our aggressive schedule. Here's where we are in relation to our November benchmark to show some percentage, but I don't believe to predict what it will be in the next filing, whether that's 83, 80, 45%, I don't think that's appropriate today.
Okay.
Yeah, I think figure Charlie in the VCM will show you our pathway.
Okay, great, thank you. And let me go ahead and ask you, speaking of figures, these next few questions are about figure A and the McKinney-Haswell testimony. You have that before you?
Okay. Thanks, got it. Yep.
Now, understanding that we now have a February 2020 rebaseline, I do just want to ask this question. Is it a correct reading of figure A that for the reporting period, namely July through December of last year, that earned performance fell below the April baseline plan in each of the 6 months?
Yeah, that's what the picture shows.
Okay, thank you.
And
And
this picture is against the aggressive site working plan, not against a November benchmark.
correct, okay. Now, in the testimony, you talked about Unit 3 performance in particular, and its backlog of hours increasing. And I apologize if you said this before, I didn't catch it, but by how much did the backlog increase relative to Unit 3 during the reporting period?
Yeah, total backlog was approximately 900,000 hours. The proportion that was Unit 3, I think it may be 900,000.
I believe you're right, Mr. Haswell.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the total backlog, right?
Yeah, the vast majority of that backlog was tied to Unit 3. For the most part of the reporting period, Unit 4 was on that aggressive plan. So I would just simply say the vast majority of that backlog was tied to Unit 3.
Okay, and all I'm trying to figure out is how much did it increase during the last reporting period, if you know?
We'd have to go check. I mean, that's what the total backlog was. We'd have to go back and just, see if it stretches before that and then do the subtraction. We could get that if that's important.
It's not, just curious. Okay. Now let's talk about the February, I guess we'll call it the February schedule refinement. As I understand it, that pushed 2 of the Unit 3 milestones out by 6 weeks, namely cold hydro testing and hot functional testing. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And now cold hydro testing, that verifies that the primary system can hold the designed operating pressure.
Correct.
And then hot functional testing verifies that the system can heat to normal operating temperature and pressure based on the NRC approved design. Is that right?
That's right. We generate heat using the reactor coolant pumps and heat up the entire that primary system up to normal operating temperatures and pressures, and then do a variety of tests and validate that the plant operates at that point through that test as designed. Right.
Okay, and how would you characterize the importance of these 2 particular milestones relative to others?
Well, each milestone has importance. Hot functional test, I would say of the 2, takes you further and further closer to, fuel load, and it integrates more systems. So, and essentially hot functional test also generally signifies the completion of, major construction.
Okay. So the February refinement, as I understand it, it's to provide, at least in part, to provide additional time to work off the Unit 3 backlog of hours. Is that correct?
Yeah, if you think about how we approached it, we took a number of activities into account. One was to deal with the backlog. 2 was to develop the November benchmark. 3, we also rolled in our detailed, I'd say, additional planning and scheduling of the hot functional to fuel load window. If you remember, we talked about previously, that was a 5-month window, and then also the fuel load to commercial is a 6-month window. So we have refined those windows and rolled that into the 2020 plan. And that's how we've been able to maintain, our May end date.
Okay. Now, this schedule adjustment of pushing those 2 milestones out by 6 weeks, was that made prior to the workforce mitigation reduction plan that is talked about in the letter and to a certain extent in your testimony?
Yeah, that was all in the February snap. The workforce reduction is really, 2 weeks ago.
So is 6 weeks still sufficient, or is that something you need to reevaluate in light of the mitigation plan?
We will see. And as we said, we'll continue to evaluate how this period goes. But our focus is to move resources onto Unit 3 to try to regain, the production levels that we need. So that's why we kind of talk about cold hydro testing being in the June, July timeframe. If we can hold it into the June timeframe, obviously the better, but recognizing there is a bit more uncertainty right now than in February when we put that plan together.
Sure. Now, you also pushed out the start date for initial energization and integrated flushing, those 2 milestones for Unit 4. Is that right?
Yeah, this is a really good story. And there's a real good reasons why that was done. So this is directly applying learnings from Unit 3 and placing them on Unit 4. So we elected to resequence and allow construction more ability to get more of the electrical work done. And we just find it to be a more efficient, effective process. So that was more in just logic versus, resourcing or having difficulty.
And by how much did you push out those 2 milestones?
Yeah, I would just have to check. I don't, it doesn't really have any material impact on our plan on Unit 4. It just optimizes construction to continue to get more work done versus stopping construction and then moving to testing. That's how we did it on Unit 3. We've evaluated that and said, now let's try a bit different approach that we think will work out better. We can get that number for you.
Yeah.
So a few questions about the November benchmark. So that outlines productivity levels necessary to support the in-service dates. Is that right?
So I would say it lays out a physical schedule. So we've built a November schedule in our integrated project schedule in our tool. So it's not just levels of construction that's needed. It's also testing requirements and milestones and everything else. So it's not the easiest way to communicate is how's construction going, but it also has testing requirements and turnover requirements and startup activities also in that schedule. But the way we communicate it today is how are you doing against milestones and construction levels.
Okay. So tell me if I'm understanding this correctly, is one of the points of the November benchmark simply to say, as long as you meet those milestones indicated in red, that you'll still be on track to meet the in-service date for Unit 3?
Very well said. That's correct. That's
Okay.
correct.
Yeah, the whole purpose of the November benchmark, you've heard in these proceedings and we've discussed it offline. We had the baseline to measure against. We all thought it valuable to have another benchmark. And so that's why we developed the November benchmark.
Okay. And just to give an example, looking at, I think this is figure B. If you haven't met cold hydro test, if you haven't met that milestone by September of this year, would that be an indication that the approved in-service date for Unit 3 is in jeopardy?
I would say, yeah, that's one indication. So just like any other schedule, any other plan, our aggressive site work plan, the November benchmark schedule, that's one path to get to an end date. So yes, if cold hydro test hasn't started by September, then we may have some pressure on the November date, but there's still flexibility to accomplish milestones and reach end dates, whether it's on an aggressive schedule or if it's on a November benchmark schedule.
Okay. Now,
Yeah,
another
if I
question
look
about,
at, if I look at the dates, I think cold hydro in the November is out in October. So if we did September, there'd still be a month of margin there. And there's still likely some margin at the very, very back end. So
okay, so it's
we
actually,
would, yeah, we would shorten, you know, the margin, obviously get closer to a November timeframe, certainly.
okay. Yeah, the graph is a little hard to read, so you're saying it's actually more like October 2020, not September.
Yeah, I think that's in one of the documents.
One Bravo.
Okay.
Page 9. Yeah, table 1 Bravo on page 9 of the VCM report.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Looking again at figure B, do y'all have an earned performance figure for March 2021? I mean, 2020, excuse me.
Hey, Dave, you gotta have it.
Yeah, it was up over 2%. Well, I can give you the exact number here in a second. As we said, through March, we're essentially kind of on plan. April, we've seen a decrease.
Yeah, I believe it was about 2.2%. We'll get the exact number.
And is there a final figure for April, or is that still being put together?
It was about
was more like-
1.25%.
Yeah, 1.25. That's the direct impacts of, you know, the COVID and very high absenteeism we went through. So it's our plan, as we said, now that we've restructured kind of the workforce and reallocated resources, and we're in that process now, you know, our goal is to get back up to the, you know, closer to the 2%.
Okay. Now, is it correct to read figure B as reflecting fairly significant adjustments to the April 2019 plan? And I know significant is an undefined term in a way. So let me just ask, if you look at June 2020, for example, looks like the blue bar, which I understand represents February 2020 rebaseline, is roughly 8 times higher than the gray one.
You could read it that way, yes, I guess.
Which, I mean,
I
that
mean,
is,
it's just a movement of work. I mean, essentially on that April plan, you know, we were already would have been at about 95% complete with construction.
and for the remaining months of 2020, would it be true in pretty much every case that the blue bar is a good bit taller than the gray one?
And that's because we had to move work out to work later and work off that backlog. So yes, I mean, because we didn't accomplish work earlier, so in that 2019 timeframe, we had to move work out, and that was part of that schedule refinement, was giving construction more time, like you mentioned, 6 weeks additional on 2 big, large milestones, but then also scheduling construction work to work and activities for construction to go all the way till fuel load being deployed.
Yeah, that's kind of the interesting point. If we would have just left the baseline in place, at this point in time, we would have been reporting exceeding significantly the April baseline monthly and weekly numbers.
All right. And then is it correct to say of figure B that in several months ahead, namely June and then August through the remainder of 2020, the November benchmarks, those red lines, require you to perform above and beyond even the February rebaseline?
As set back in February, that's true. Today, if you look at the work that was accomplished in January, February, March, and April, those bars would be significantly lower, to where the red bars, which is the November benchmark, if you're looking at figure B, the average of those red bars from today to the end of the year would be closer to 1%.
Yeah.
And if you look at the beginning of the graph from whatever, April 19 through, just say February, even March of this year, you know, we've clearly done greater than 2%.
Okay. And in November of this year, it looks like you need to more than double your performance relative to the February rebaseline in order to meet the fuel load milestone. Am I reading that correctly?
Can you restate the question?
So if you look at November, it looks like you'd need to more than double your performance relative to the February rebaseline in order to meet the fuel load milestone. Am I reading that correctly?
The
So
fuel
no,
load
I think
milestone
you're
is next June.
Yeah, I think what Mr. Kaczynski is trying to say here is, remember, these red diamond here that represent the November benchmark schedule assume that work will be achieved later. So the curve is going to be flatter. So if we get work done sooner, which would represent those blue bars, and we meet the blue diamond, then yes, the bars are going to be higher the further you go out to meet that November benchmark. So it's not just that we would need more work done, it's because work is scheduled later in the November schedule, the November benchmark schedule. It's because we've allowed ourselves in that schedule more time to complete the work and more time to reach those milestones.
Okay.
Yeah, it's easier to see on the lines at the top of the graph where you can see the slope of the curve for your percent complete. And you can see that on the blue line, the green is right with it. And so you've got a gap there to the red line. And so you can actually slow down in a sense and still be above that red line.
Okay. And speaking of additional time with the November benchmark, am I correct in reading this that you could miss the fuel load milestone by 7 or more months without jeopardizing the approved in-service date?
Yeah, and that's the
right,
benefit to working to the
November
aggressive
to
site
June.
plan.
Yeah. So Mr. Kaczynski, when you talked about June before, is that what you were referring to?
Yeah, June of 2021.
Okay. Now, can we turn to figure C, which is on page 12 of the testimony? So as I understand it, that figure depicts recent electrical performance.
Page 4, who's testing?
What, can you repeat the reference you're making?
This is on page 12, figure C. As I understand it, that intends to depict recent electrical performance.
That's correct.
So again, we have 3 different colored bars, green for earned, blue for the February baseline, and red for the November benchmark.
That's correct.
I'm struck by the part of the graph that runs basically from the end of March through the end of May. Why are there such large discrepancies between the February 2020 plan as indicated by the blue bar and the November benchmark as indicated by the red?
Yeah, so it's that concept of, if you think about where the blue diamond for cold hydro test is in the February benchmark, it's in May. The cold hydro test diamond for the November benchmark is in September. And so we would give ourselves more time if we were going to work to a November benchmark schedule to complete that electrical work. And that's why the red bars are lower. And then what Mr. Hazel was getting to earlier, I think it's very simply illustrated on the curves at the very top of the line, the blue and the red. The slope of the blue curve is obviously more aggressive because it's an aggressive site work plan. And the red line, which is more of the November benchmark, is obviously less aggressive.
Okay, so the blue bars are showing that you're pushing for weekly earned hours well in excess of what you think you'd actually need to stay on track, as indicated by the benchmark.
Yeah, I think the way this works, the way this has worked since February, when we put these two together, anything we achieve above the red line, we now have a, positive surplus in hours, i.e. gives us margin to November. We keep building that. That's the whole concept behind it. So now in the last couple of weeks, as we've had impacts from COVID, we're not building any more margin. We're essentially kind of holding the margin that we have. So as soon as we get ourselves, on an increasing trend again, then I would anticipate, barring anything significant happening, that we would start to build margin again against the November, both direct construction complete and electrical.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Just a few questions about contingency costs. So, Mr. Kuzinski, did I hear you correctly earlier to say, because the testimony talks about 140 million contingency having been allocated. Did I hear you this morning say it's now up to 206?
Yes, we just allocated another 66 this quarter, end of March.
Okay. And does that mean, that doesn't mean the dollars have been spent yet, is that correct?
That's right. An example would be we've adjusted our forecast on our CPI, our cost performance index. So we just changed our assumption of what that number might be going forward. We actually raised it. So essentially, we then allocated some part of that contingency looking forward from now through the end of the project with a higher CPI, meaning a higher cost. So, if in fact that assumption turns out to be true, then those dollars would be spent in the months going forward. So what I was trying to communicate is we're trying to identify risks and build those into our cost forecasting looking forward. So we're drawing down some of that risk.
Okay. And as I understand it from the testimony, one of the risks that the allocation is being made to address is craft attraction and retention.
So yeah, it's more of a historical risk that we funded. It's per diem for travelers, additional wage rates for electricians and pipe fitters, things like that. So what we try to communicate is, hey, this is what we've been allocating contingency for over the past 3 quarters to fund, and whether it's a recognized risk or a forecast risk, it was still a risk to the project at one point in time.
Okay. And I guess the one thing I was wondering is just, is any allocation for attraction, retention still necessary now that you're reducing workforce by 20%?
So that's a complicated question. Certainly under kind of this economic times, the availability of craft now changes, but it is going to depend on, what we may need to do to attract craft to the site at this point. I would just say right now it's a bit early to tell. We're just still right in the middle of it.
Okay. Now, just a few questions about rate impacts, and I'm referencing figure A on page 7 of the report.
Okay.
And so the peak rate impact will be around 10%, which I think is similar to what was the last time.
Yes, very close to the same as it was last time, or approximately 10%.
So a little more than double what the current rate impact is from Vogel. Is that correct?
Currently have about 4.5% in rates.
Okay. Now the rate impact depicted here, is this the average for all retail customers?
Yeah, this is the average retail rate impact across all customer segments.
And I apologize if this has been asked for in a prior VCM, but has the company ever presented the percentage rate impact broken out by customer class?
I do not have that by customer class. I'm trying to think if it was answered in a hearing request previously. I believe it was.
Okay, if it was, I'll find it. If not, I would make a hearing request for that information, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, can you?
So it would be just the percentage rate impact broken out by customer class.
Is that a request y'all can do, George Power?
We can, Mr. Chairman, but I think that's been provided before. Let me research that, and I can let Mr. Edwards talk now.
Okay.
We can provide it if it had not been provided before.
Okay.
And have y'all done any bill impact analysis?
For which period in time?
How residential bills, average residential bills, what they would be expected to be once all of Vogel is in rates. Has the company done that that analysis at all?
Yeah, I'm not positive.
Can we just get that checked on? And if, I'm not asking the company to do analysis they haven't done, but if they have done it, could we make a request for that?
We can see if it's been done.
Okay. Now, Mr. Chairman, I do have just my remaining questions do relate to COVID, which I understood was permissible under Ms. Malcolm's letter, but I can assure you I've a number of my questions have been answered, and I will undertake to streamline it further. But just some miscellaneous questions that are really just trying to get information that that wasn't apparent in the letter. Well, first, let me just ask generally, is it fair to say that how effectively the company responds to this new risk will in turn impact whether additional project costs and scheduling delays materialize?
I think there's just a lot of factors that are in play there. We certainly have taken a very strong approach to it. In fact, we're recognized by the building trades as going well above and beyond what typical projects are doing around the country. Our co-owners, our boards, everybody is, very supportive and believe they're way out front. As we stated in the testimony, it is just obviously unusual situation that we'll have to continue to monitor going forward.
Okay, thank you. Now, the letter talks about expanding, and y'all talked about this morning, expanding on-site medical facilities and increasing the number of medical personnel. Can you tell us how much medical personnel was increased by?
The way I would look at it, we essentially set up an urgent care at the site. Now that we were manning 24/7. We've been able to pull that back a little bit on the weekends now with the reduction in the workforce. But I don't have the exact figures. I don't know if Aaron or others do, but we're talking in the couple dozen staff to man this facility, and then we flex as needed.
And who are the site's medical advisors that have been advising on precautionary measures?
So we've engaged 3 different individuals and epidemiologists. We use the medical resources for the company internal, and then we had another medical physician that has a lot of experience in running these types of clinics and responding.
And is this like ongoing consultation, or is it just on an ad hoc basis when y'all have a question? Or
we talk multiple times a day.
And did I understand the prior response that the companies actually retain these people, or are these people who are just helping from the outside?
They're consulting resources on retainer.
So like full-time, basically full-time to the project?
Yeah.
Or?
Yes, full-time.
Okay. Can any worker who wants a test for the virus get one?
So what we've done is we really are following, CDC guidance here, and right now, one, similar to around the country, we don't take the approach of testing 100% of everybody that wants a test. I mean, I'm trying to find a test to go do, and I'd love to do an antibody test, but that is not the way that the company, both here at Vogel or our company, does it. However, we encourage any employee that is not feeling well at all, because that is the most sensitive indicator, that we want them to come to the medical facility and perform the test. And if that medical group believes that COVID is a possibility and they do the COVID test, then we immediately identify and isolate close contacts. If that test comes back as positive, then we do offer testing to those close contacts. But no, essentially it's just impractical. If you play this out, you could do 7,000 tests today. We'd have to do 7,000 tests 3 days from now, and do another 7,000 3 days after that. So that's just not what the testing regime is anywhere.
Okay. These are, you mentioned antibody. These are viral tests, not antibody tests?
Correct. This is just for the virus itself, right?
Okay. Now, and so said in your testimony, when you test workers, you put them on paid leave and also people they've been in contact with. If a worker tests positive, I'm assuming they go on paid leave until they're recovered. Is that right?
Yes, typically that's 14 days. CDC guidance is a little bit less conservative than that, but we have implemented a standard 14-day policy, and then those individuals come back through the medical facility to get evaluated.
And Mr. Kaczynski, along those lines, you have had several dozen now that have recovered, have been cleared, and are back on site working, correct?
Yeah, so, we've had even quite a bit more than that. And I think the numbers I put out there, if we've had 185 kind of total positive cases, we've had 119 that have timed out through that process and are eligible to work. So it's difficult to say they're all back to work because some of those folks were part of the reduction in force. So, but I think it's important to note that, kind of our rate there, the gap between number of active cases and those that are on the sidelines is getting much smaller here, and which tells us, at least our data shows, if you look at it on a 7-day rolling average, it does appear we're past the peak and we're down on the other side of positive cases.
Okay. Now the letter talks about personal protective equipment. What additional PPE has been provided to workers?
So as a standard practice, all our workers, when you're in the work site outside of offices, are wearing gloves. So that's been in place. But the most significant, I'd say, change in PPE is our supply of masks to the entire workforce. So, we distributed 11,000 masks early on as soon as that was recommended and they became available, and we continue to replenish that, and we've seen good response of use of the masks on site. Obviously there's some work that you do when you have hoods on and things, it's not feasible, but similar to the general community, the use of the masks has continued to increase.
Okay, and one thing I didn't see among measures y'all put in place, and maybe you just didn't list it, but what about hand washing?
Oh, so that was done day one.
I can weigh in. Yeah, so as Mr. Kaczynski was saying, that was on day one, the increased hand washing.
You may have seen in one of the press reports that, one was shown empty. That's unfortunate that the whole picture wasn't shown. If you would have panned the camera 5 feet over, you would have seen 12 other ones that were full. So yes, there are occasionally one that may be empty, but that does not mean we're not supplying that to our workforce.
And Mr. Kaczynski, I'm sorry that you cut out for a minute there, but are you referring to hand washing stations or to hand sanitizers, or? I lost him again.
Yes, he was. Yeah, he was referring to hand washing stations,
Yes,
extra
both.
sanitation.
Sanitizer, hand cleanly, and many of the common areas.
Okay, got it. So just a couple questions about absenteeism and the workforce reductions. When the letter that Ms. Balcom filed, when it says that there are current high rates of absenteeism, what are those rates?
So in general terms, our target kind of absenteeism, runs in the 9 to 13 kind of range. That would be a typical kind of baseline depending on the time of year. We saw rates rise to the 20s, into the 30s, and then for some crafts, well into the 40s. So clearly was a signal that was an input on our decision making to reduce craft size and reduce the overall footprint. And since we've executed that, it's really been about 2 weeks. We've seen absenteeism now trending back down. I've seen numbers in the low 20s, maybe a couple of days or shifts in the teens. So we expect our general trend to go back to our more baseline absenteeism level.
So the baseline, like 9 to 13%, that's what would be considered normal?
Yeah, that would be our normal, right?
Hey, I have one question about how does this absenteeism this winter compare to previous winters? Have you guys looked at it with flu and other things? Is it about the same? Is it substantially more?
Yeah, outside of COVID, we didn't really see much change.
But due to COVID, it was substantially higher than last winter.
I mean, when we think about relevant comparisons with COVID, we're talking about sometimes double or even triple normal rates of absenteeism depending on the craft.
And now the 20% reduction, has all of that occurred already, or is that still the target you're trying to reach by the summer?
That is complete.
Okay. Now, a couple questions about the incremental cost of the mitigation. Your testimony said 15 to 30. I think you said this morning it's around 20 million.
That's correct.
And that's Georgia Power's portion?
Yes.
So then would 100%, on a 100% basis, would it be around 40 million for all owners?
Yes.
And that's the 20 million is a total cost for Georgia Power. In other words, it's not like a monthly figure. Is that right?
Today, that's our initial incremental estimate of COVID cost estimate.
Okay. And you say that the estimate is based on two key assumptions. One is absenteeism normalizing, which we just talked about, and the other is intended productivity increases being realized. So does that mean that even if absenteeism does normalize, if you don't get the intended productivity increases, the cost could end up being higher?
Yes, that's what that means.
All right, and then I just have a few more questions. These relate to subcontractors and supply chain interference. First, just as a general matter, can you give us some examples of supply chain interference as a result of COVID measures being undertaken by suppliers? Can you just give us a sense of exactly what you're talking about?
So an example would be a company in California that we're procuring, some specialized equipment. When California went on their lockdown, that facility shut down. So we worked to help pave the way to reopen that facility. And that's an example of things we deal with in the supply chain arena.
Okay, and then you talk about your subcontractors also dealing with supply chain delays and the company helping them. So how do y'all help with that process for a subcontractor?
As a critical infrastructure project, we have generated letters to these companies that they can use to work with their kind of local officials to help adjust kind of the climate that they're operating in, depending on what state. And as you know, each state, is not operating under all the same types of rules. But generically, we were able to provide that assistance that was helpful in a number of cases.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, that's all I have. Gentlemen, I thank you for your time, especially under these difficult circumstances.
Can I close the loop just on one? I said I'd get you the info on the initial energization on Unit 4. So technically about a 4-month move on initial energization from April, May into August of this year. And the reasons for that is once you energize that equipment, there's additional equipment that is close proximity. And in order to do construction on that equipment, you would have to then take some of your IE equipment out of service. So what we allowed to do is allow more work to do in that general area, just because we don't absolutely have to have the IE equipment that early. So it allows construction to work more efficiently and safer if we move that milestone a bit back.
Okay, just to be clear, these are the Unit 4 milestones.
Unit 4, that's correct.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, before you move on to the next cross camera, I just wanted to also close the loop on Mr. Ebersbach's hearing request. We filed a response. There was a hearing request in VCM 19 for rate impacts by customer class. Hearing request 1-2, we filed a response that essentially confirmed that Georgia Power does not track rate impacts by customer class, and that was a hearing request made by SAFE. And we don't track them by customer rate impacts or billing impacts by customer class.
I want to ask the panel a question I haven't asked in the last couple of VCMs. It regards the summer plant and some of the equipment that had been over there. I know that the last time I asked the question, there was some ownership issues regarding who actually owned the equipment and whether you all could access it or purchase it at a bargain basement price. Has there been any change in the equipment situation from summer, and have you acquired any of the equipment that maybe would have saved us some money otherwise?
We have worked through some of the issues, and some of the issues around whether or not we could purchase that equipment was issues between Westinghouse and Santee Cooper and the owners of that plant. Some of that has been worked through. They have reached an agreement that allows them to sell equipment and materials to us. Mr. Abamas could probably add a little bit more color to what exactly we have pursued with them.
So yeah, we're pursuing things like cable fittings. Even at one point, a reactor coolant pump that was marked for DC summer was refitted with the improved locking coupler mechanism that we just got on site as a spare part. About a week ago or so. So to answer your question directly, the logjam, I guess, is effectively broken. We have an agreement to have access to equipment and materials if we need to, depending on the circumstance.
Right, thank you.
Okay. Georgia Watch.
Good afternoon. Liz Carter of Georgia Watch. Good to see you all, even remotely. So I just wanted to start today, going back like a long time ago, but just this morning, to the summary that was provided. And in response to questions earlier from Mr. Thomas, would you agree that you emphasized Georgia Power and Southern Nuclear's belief that working against the aggressive schedule, call it, has been good for the project in terms of meeting the commission approved target dates for operations?
I think you were breaking up a little bit on me, but I think your question was, do we agree, per our previous discussion with Mr. Thomas, that working to the aggressive schedule has been a good thing for the project? And I would, if that's the question, I would answer that as yes.
That was the question. I'm sorry. Am I still breaking up?
That's fine. Good.
And now, during your summary, do you recall saying that the 20% reduction in workforce due to COVID-19 should actually improve performance, even if there's less productivity in terms of units complete? Because there will be less absenteeism and self-isolation and generally improved staff morale. Did I summarize that correctly from what you testified earlier?
That seems correct, yep.
But isn't that an acknowledgement that the aggressive schedule was having a negative impact in terms of performance?
No.
Yeah, so it was in reference to the impact of COVID-19 directly that improved productivity measure and absenteeism. Prior to COVID-19 and the effects of that pandemic, or the current pandemic, as we said a couple times today, production was meeting our aggressive plan. Absenteeism was well within its normal range, but with the onset of the pandemic, we had to make an adjustment.
Yeah, absent COVID, we would not have made any major, changes in our workforce. We would have continued to work on efficiency and overall production, but we would not have made a 20% reduction.
And I'll be clear, we think it will increase productivity versus how we've been doing under COVID, but it will not increase production above what we were doing previously. Total earned hours.
Yeah, we would expect with a lower headcount, like Mr. Haswell was saying, we're going to have less earned hours, but the intent is to hopefully, in comparison to current COVID relations, then if the productivity or the production measure would be higher.
So in light of that response, I'm now going to briefly dip. I have more questions related to testimony, the pre-file testimony later. But for now, if you would just go to the Kaczynski testimony and look at lines. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, could you say where you are? What testimony?
I'm in the Kaczynski Abramovitz testimony, page 14, lines 11 through 14. And I recognize that listen, but this is a challenging time for all of us. So I please take this in the spirit of just trying to get a clearer understanding. And I'm trying, and I recognize that we're now, the testimony was filed before things have developed related to the crisis. So acknowledging that up front. I'm looking at your testimony and I'm trying to understand where this is pre or post COVID based on how you responded to my first question. And in your testimony, you state that the aggressive work plan for electrical earnings will have challenges. However, we do expect some mitigation in these challenges with work areas starting to become less congested. Is that because of COVID, or is that because of the February rebaselining, or both, or something else entirely?
No, we were experiencing some challenges in electrical production, but as construction completes, Mr. Kaczynski briefly said that Unit 3 is now 90% complete. As construction completes, that does lessen congestion in areas and allow production in those areas to ramp up.
So lines 10 through 15 on page 14 were absent COVID, so they did not regard any kind of implications due to COVID. It was purely based on what Mr. Haswell was saying was the February schedule, the February 2020 refinement that we were working towards.
And yet that was not an indulgent. So was the congestion that you're referring to in that testimony tied to or an all labor on site to meet the aggressive schedule?
I believe the question was it tied to electrical labor on site?
Well, in that section of the testimony, I do believe you're talking about electrical, but I'm trying to get at, it seems that you're saying the aggressive schedule has been overall good for the project in terms of meetings, the commission approved dates. In some of your testimony, you seem to be saying that the congestion itself is causing some, is having a negative impact on performance. And that's what I'm just trying to get some clarity there.
Yeah, and so the clarity there is that's just a nature of the design of the plant. There are some electrical rooms inside the plant that are very congested workspaces, and so that's areas that, we would have electricians in there, pulling cable, terminating cable. And so as things are completed and there is more opportunity to increase production.
Yeah, a simple example might be we have a room that's 15 by 15, and 2 years ago it was empty.
Mm-hmm.
We have to put 10 panels into that room. And as you get to the 9th panel, it's a lot more congested. It's just nothing super new out of COVID. It's just the nature of the design.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And now again, this next question is what I recall hearing in your summary this morning. And I'm just looking to clarify. I believe I heard you say that you expected the 20% reduction in workforce would cost well, let me just leave it simple to start with. That you expected the 20% reduction in workforce would cost approximately $20 million. Do I have that right?
In pure power dollars, our total, I would say, marginal cost of COVID today is $20 million. The workforce reduction implications are part of that $20 million.
Okay, so that's $20 million, because I recall when the company first announced that making this reduction, I seem to remember a statement that it's going to be estimated cost when the was about $15 million.
Yeah.
Whatever the cost was for workforce reduction, as well as other COVID-related costs. Do I have that right?
So in our initial financial disclosure that we filed with the SEC, it said the range was $15 to $30 million. As part of our monthly cost forecasting process and our quarterly disclosure process, we more, I guess you could say, refined that estimate to a $20 million estimate, but it's still an incremental estimate today, and it has a load of assumptions in it that could change what that number is in the long run.
Sure. Okay. I appreciate that additional clarification. But that will help me understand. Doesn't workforce reduction usually lower costs? Don't companies usually, cut the workforce and lay people off to save money in a crisis? I mean, doesn't workforce reduction usually lower costs, and why not in this case?
So, in general, where you're headed is correct. Less people usually means less cost. On a construction project, we have activities that we have to complete, and every daily work and activity has an overhead cost to it. Every hour we work has an overhead cost. With this reduction in workforce, what we've done is we've moved hours or activities out for Unit 4. That has a marginal hotel load cost. In our budgets, we already have a cost to accomplish each one of those activities, but if I'm going to schedule them later in time, there is a hotel cost that's needed to fund that cost. So that's where that marginal incremental cost is coming from.
Okay. This is as we have experienced low these many years, delays cost money, right? Every time the project has been delayed, there's been an increase in the cost, and this would be similar to that.
I think to make it clear, it might have been a subtle point, but out of the 2020 February schedule refinement, we did move up Unit 4's completion a couple of months. Mm-hmm. So through this process now, we are giving that back up. So there's 2 additional months. And as Aaron said, there are overhead, material, equipment, the general kind of hotel costs now that, we're not in our forecast, but we have to deal with. So that's where some of this money is coming from, that 2-month kind of schedule extension off of our February 2020.
So the $20 million tied to anticipated delays in the schedule and the hotel costs associated with that.
Yes, and if we can do better, and if we get through this, in I'd say an optimistic way, and we can bring some craft back on in the manner that we improve overall production, we'll go back after that. But I think sitting here today, in order to focus on Unit 3, that is what we needed to give up through this process. Just because we just can't deal with more than 7,000 people at the site in an efficient manner.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll expand on that just a bit. We're talking about extending out Unit 4 schedule by a couple months versus what we had planned back earlier this year. So we moved it from a March completion of 2022 to a May completion of 2022. That's part of the cost. The other part is this transition to the smaller workforce. So anytime you go through a workforce reduction, you have to reshape crews and reprioritize work. That has a cost to it. So in the near term, in the next several weeks, we do expect our production levels to be quite low and not reach our expectations. That has a cost to it. And you'd have to move those hours out and work those hours later in time. That has that hotel cost as well.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that additional detail. And would you say that there are, you said earlier that the 20 million included other measures related to COVID-19. Could you list what some of those might be other than what you just explained in terms of the hotel costs and what was just mentioned, the transition to a smaller workforce as a cost?
Sure. So you've heard us talk about the medical clinic, the expanded medical infrastructure that Mr. Kaczynski characterized as almost an urgent care. That has a cost to it. That's incremental. So it includes that infrastructure staying in place for the rest of the year. Other pieces and parts of that $20 million is additional hand washing stations like we talked about, additional sanitation, protective equipment, things like that. The vast majority of the cost is not that additional infrastructure. It really is the impact to time and efficiency related to the workforce.
And I'll go even a little bit further. Over the last number of years, a big focus of ours was to how do we improve productivity, i.e. the net amount of work with a given workforce size. And so the things that you do in order to improve that are to put people closer to the work site, get buses and vans and trams that move high levels of number of people more efficiently around the site. Well, the reality of it is trying to implement, COVID type restrictions essentially undoes all of those activities. So it's more difficult to measure, but believe me, watching people walk in the morning and at the end of the day versus being bused and trammed, there is an impact on efficiency. And it's difficult to quantify, but those are some of the more subtle impacts on our overall ability. But we have to do them in order to keep the distancing and keep safety first. But we're not going to use that as an excuse. It's just that's what we see, and we want to appropriately account for it, talk about it, make sure everybody's aware, and forecast it the best we can.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that explanation. And now, I believe either you said earlier, or I remember that the company did put out those statements when they filed the 8K with the SEC, to the effect that the 20% reduction, 25%, the 20% reduction would cost Georgia Power Company, and at the time it was 15, now we're talking 20, I know it could be up to 30, so the dollar amount isn't now. The statement said it would cost Georgia Power Company. And my question is, would the statement be more accurate to say or will Georgia Power plan to absorb these costs?
I think you have to restate that question. You faded out.
I'm sorry. So I believe either you might have stated earlier, but certainly when the company put out the statement about the workforce reduction and the costs associated with that we've just been discussing, the statement was to the effect that the 20% reduction would cost Georgia Power Company an estimated at the time $15 million. My question is, did that statement mean it would cost Georgia Power Company or its customers? Will Georgia Power Company absorb the cost?
I think we've actually already answered this question once today. All of the costs associated with building this plant will be brought forward to the commission at the end of the day. We've got, as we've stated earlier, we've got contingency on the project that is designed for risk. We're not sure exactly what risk we will encounter going forward. There's still a lot to be seen as to how COVID affects us. But at the end of the day, the company will bring our costs forward and discuss those with the commission. The commission will determine what goes back into rates.
Right. And so will other owners incur similar costs? The statement again was talking about Georgia Power incurring costs. So I'm just trying to understand more specifically if you're talking about the portion of the costs that Georgia Power will incur and that the other owners will incur similar costs based on their percentage of ownership.
When we refer to Georgia Power in a document like that, we're referring to the Georgia Power portion of the overall cost. The other owners, we're all sharing these costs.
Okay.
Currently, it's being paid for with project contingency, and those project contingency dollars are the dollars that we'll look to bring forward to this commission if and when appropriate.
Okay. And that my last question was just to clarify that this 20 million approximate, could be more, could be less, but that would be something that you could see fitting into the existing contingency budget.
Yeah, we're utilizing the existing contingency budget for those dollars currently.
Okay, thank you. And then the remainder of my questions, I believe. I had, one more on this sort of general area. You've mentioned a few times today that you listed some of the costs in that roughly 20 million that include medical, transition to smaller workforce, and your hand washing, impacts on the improved productivity measures like buses and trams. I didn't hear in that list any costs associated with measures you are taking to keep the community safe, because your testimony talks about keeping the community safe. So could you say a little bit more about what the company is doing to keep the community safe and what those costs might be and whether they're included in this $20 million?
So I think in generic terms, all the actions that we're doing in order to provide the best medical care and support on site indirectly helps protect the community. There are other things that the broader company may be doing to help, local area hospitals. That's not included in anything we're talking about today. But for us to minimize, the impacts, the spread, the total number, allow people to stay locally in the area to recover. That is what we mean by helping, protect the community. However,
Okay.
There's limits of what we can do. We can encourage and we can set, really good standards at the site, but we have limited capabilities of a workforce outside the bounds of our facility. And so, we try to encourage, the very best behaviors in accordance with the CDC, but as you can imagine, once outside our footprint, we do not have any real direct control of that, as you know.
I just wanted to clarify, because I'm now turning to questions that are in your pre-filed testimony and looking at page 4. This is the beginning with the McKinney-Haswell testimony. My next few questions are tied to the McKinney-Haswell testimony. And looking on page 4, line 11 to 12, you specifically reference protecting the health and safety of the team as well as the surrounding community. So that's why I just wanted to have clarification that by protecting your workforce, you believe that is helping to protect the community. Is that a correct characterization?
Yeah, and one other way to look at it, maybe Jeremiah or David can add in, but early on, if you remember how this all unfolded, it was all about to slow the spread so that medical facilities in any area of the country were not overwhelmed. That is primarily the starting point, as we address this. And we've been successful at doing that. Local area hospitals have very good capabilities at this point. We certainly did not want to be an area that put pressure on that arena. And well over 90% of the folks that have come down with the COVID just recover at home with really little to no medical assistance. So we have not been contributing to, I would call impacts on the community.
Yeah, so I think to add to what Mr. Kaczynski is saying, it's very simply by by expanding our medical infrastructure and offering testing on site, we believe that lessen the burden to the local health infrastructure. And we can take that burden off of them and be hopefully the first choice for our workforce to come get evaluated with our medical professionals and be tested if necessary to lessen that burden across the area.
Thanks for that clarification and additional detail. And then on page 5 of the McKinney-Haswell testimony, looking at lines 23 and 24, reference this discussion talks about risk to the project of COVID, and I've already said I'm pick up old bones. I understand that we really don't today know, hard to forecast what. But in this section of the testimony, you talk about the impacts from the combination of COVID-related risks and other pandemic evolved. It's difficult to estimate at this time. So I understand that, but the question is, are you developing projected scenarios that will forecast impacts to the cost and schedule? back in, several VCMs ago, the commission staff and then requested in the commission ordered that you all begin projecting, 36, 60, so forth months out. And even though you said you didn't think it would take that long, you went ahead and ran some numbers to calculate based on those delay scenarios. So my question now is, are you developing potential cost and schedule impacts based on various scenarios that you're modeling? And I tie that to the Abramovitz testimony on page 6 at line 9, where they do discuss
So that was a lot. I didn't hear quite everything there. I think the question was, are we developing scenarios currently, which obviously the project has developed scenarios on how to respond to the pandemic. We have not developed new cost or schedule scenarios yet. We would expect to do that after kind of the site earnings stabilize and we know what we can do with the lower workforce. And then those will be presented in future economics. We are not developing currently economics based on any delay scenarios other than our current cost and schedule.
Yeah, and I'll add into that. And so, yeah, you've seen the testimony. We evaluated scenarios on how to potentially deal with COVID-19 as it started to develop, whether that was keep current state, like somebody mentioned, all the way down to potentially having to temporarily suspend construction on site, what the cost of that would be, maybe something in the middle. And so right now, we're closer to current state with 20% reduction in workforce. We're evaluating what that means, and that 15 to 30 million to $20 million that you're talking about, that's where that lies. And what Mr. Haslett will get into is, as the site stabilizes and as we reestablish what we would say is a normal course of business from a run rate with this new workforce, we're going to need to reestablish our baseline plans. And so what we'll get into in the next reporting cycle is, we'll say, okay, here's where we need to go for Unit 3, here's where we need to go for Unit 4. You can call it a refinement, you can call it a rebaseline, but looking at our schedule and cost estimate is routine. We should do it as often as needed, and the impact of this pandemic is a catalyst to do that. And so that's what the first step is: get the workforce right on site, start establishing new production rates that we can benchmark ourselves to and trends, and then we'll establish what our plan is going forward based on this new workforce.
Sure. I heard a good bit of that. There were a couple places where you I think I heard you say that you are certainly, as you testified, as Mr. Krasinski and Dr. Abramovitz testified, you are looking at various scenarios tied to COVID-19. And going forward, and I think the last thing I heard said was, we're always looking at impacts to cost and schedule, and that perhaps in the next VCM, we'll have another rebaselining that we'll be hearing about. In VCM 23, there might, sometime between now and the next VCM, there might be another rebaselining.
Well, yeah, sometimes in the next several months, as we understand what this workforce can do and the trends, we want to have a plan to work towards that matches the current expectations of the site. And so if that means a rebaseline of the schedule, it's a rebaseline. You can call it a refinement of the schedule. It may not change the dates. It may change the dates. Today, it's too soon to tell.
And on top of that, we forecast cost every month, and the construction monitor and commission staff, they get all those documents, so that they're constantly seeing where we are looking and what we are looking at in our cost forecast moving forward.
Yeah, and I'll add on that too. This November benchmark schedule that we laid out for Unit 3 is really important here. and we can track how we're doing our production numbers every week and how startup and ITP is doing against that schedule. And we still have that benchmark no matter what we're doing or how we're doing to those regulatory approved dates. So we have a plan that matches us, and we can still benchmark. So we know how we're progressing to those dates. That's very important.
And will that, the February re-baseline benchmark, February 2020, was as you were about to file your testimony. Do you anticipate being able to inform the commissioners, I would imagine the SEC, and other interested parties if you are able to re-baseline sooner than 6 months from now or 4 months from now, to inform everybody about what you think the impacts of the cost and schedule are going to be as COVID-19 responses are put in place?
Sure. To Mr. Haswell's point, we update the staff and the commission or the staff's consultants every month on cost. And as you heard in the opening remarks, and I think in our filings, we've said that it's going to have an implication to near-term milestones. So we're already telling folks that, yeah, cold hydro test is expected on our aggressive timeline to be sometime in the June or July timeframe. Hot functional test starting is expected to be sometime in the August to September timeframe. That is obviously different than just pinpointing an aggressive date, an aggressive schedule. So we're already giving the commission and our stakeholders what we believe is our estimate today of the implications.
But let's be really clear. When we talk about rebaselining, we talk about committed dates, we don't see, at this point, we don't see any pressure or we don't see any indication that we would come back and move our November commitment dates with this commission. We've not seen anything to indicate that. When we talk about milestones that have pressure to them, we're talking about milestones on our aggressive schedule.
Thank you. That actually anticipated my next question, which was in the testimony, McKinney-Haswell testimony, page 9, lines 18 through 20. Again, it's the electrical subcontractors. Your statement that it shows that adherence to the February 2020 aggressive site work plan remains challenged. In that case, you're talking about the May aggressive target and not the November targets. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. I really have just a few questions left. One more for this panel and then just 3 or 4 for the next panel. So again, in the McKinney-Haswell, page 12, line 4 through 6. This is where you're talking about Unit 3 subcontractor performance, and you reference subcontractors being able to access work fronts and complete the work. This is a little bit going back to where I started my questions, but it seems to, I read this as being a statement that because the site was congested with the size of the, well, clarify for me, is that statement tied to the fact that the site was congested with 9,000 workers? And now there are 7,000 workers, or was it tied to the fact that you had this aggressive work schedule?
So it's tied to the aggressive work schedule, and I wouldn't say that the site overall is congested. I'd say there are rooms inside the auxiliary building that are very, I guess, tight as far as the design goes. So there are multiple work fronts trying to happen in there at the same time. And so what's happening is we just need to get the right sequence between the Bechtel direct construction work and then the subcontract work following them. That's all that statement is referring to, is that getting the Bechtel direct construction work complete then allows the subcontractors access to complete their work and stay on schedule as well.
Okay, thank you. And my next questions are for the Kaczynski and Ramovich panel. Beginning on page 5, line 10. And the supply chain interference.
Don't tell her that we can't hear her.
Please,
Ms. Coyle, I think
when you ask,
you missed a lot of that question. It seems to be when you're looking straight at the camera, we hear you a whole lot better than when you turn away side to side. That might help.
Thank you, Mr. Hewitson. I will try. Is this better?
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Sorry for that difficulty hearing me. I'm now on page 5, line 15. That's talking about supply chain interference. Mr. Ebersbach did ask some questions earlier about that. What I'd like, some additional information I would like is what percentages of supplies might be impacted by COVID-related interference with the supply chain. In other words, what percentage of supplies does the project still need to receive to meet whether it's aggressive or commission approved targets?
That's a fairly complicated question. We have procured the vast majority on a dollar basis of supplies. We're talking more, and as you see in the VCMs, all the major components are mostly installed already in Unit 3. Essentially, we're now talking about much smaller level commodities. But if I'd step back, I would say at this point, we are not seeing any real impacts from COVID on our supply chain. We've been able to work through the first few weeks where there were some challenges, but ultimately, I don't see this one as being, a big risk to us moving forward.
So how difficult would it be to come up with that figure of what percentage?
Do you want on a dollar basis or a commodity basis? There's just many different ways to
On a
generate
commodity.
that. We're willing to do whatever would be helpful.
I'm interested in specific to the supply chain interference that you all testify to, and you're in touch with critical suppliers. There was a line too about Westinghouse somewhere in your testimony, specific supplies there. I'm just, what percentage commodity wise of supplies might be impacted by COVID-related supply chain interference?
I would have to tell you, it's pretty much indeterminate at this point. I mean, I don't see it as a big risk, but we're really going to have to see, if there's additional controls or as the country reopens, are there certain areas that then shut back down? At this point, it's pretty hypothetical. I would say we're pretty much operating in a normal fashion at this point in time.
Okay. So that might be coming out later in future reporting that you do.
Yeah, we certainly wanted to make it clear that, this is a potential impact of COVID, given that it's global and, we still have suppliers around the country that, we could see an impact. We're not seeing that big of an impact right now.
I was just trying to understand the magnitude, but I understand that it's hard to tell at this point. So I can move on with my questions.
Ms. Coyle, I know that Mr. Prinovitz was remarked to by the chairman about the same issue. This is about this particular VCM period that's already passed, not the future. And there are so many uncertainties about COVID-19 that I'm sure you understand that there's no way that we could possibly understand what's going to happen in the future. None of us are God. So I would really appreciate it if we could just respect everyone's time and stick to the VCM period that we're under the review for.
Thank you, Commissioner. And my last 3 questions are directly related to the pre-filed testimony. And this is still in the Kaczynski-Abramovitz panel, if I may. On page 6, line 4 of the testimony, there's a phrase about protecting the investment in the ground. I'm not sure what you mean by that. Would you mind clarifying what you mean by protecting the investment in the ground?
So this would be in the context of just scenario planning. And as we've talked about here recently, a month ago, we did start to do some scenario planning on where could this possibly go, all the way from we just stay the course to we make some personnel reductions, which we have implemented, all the way down to we suspend construction. And so what do you need to do if you suspend construction? That does not mean you remove 100% of everybody off the site. That equipment there needs to be maintained and monitored and protected. So there is a finite amount of resources. Yes, it's fairly small, but there is a finite amount of resources that would need to protect the investment in the ground. That's really what that means.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And then finally, on page 13 of your testimony, lines 7 to 10. And it's really line 9, the aggressive site work plan requires significant increases in earnings for unit 3. My question there is that level that's required, has the project team ever achieved at the level that you testified is needed?
Yes, as we mentioned earlier today, in the months of January, February, and March, we achieved the required construction hours to meet our aggressive site work plan.
So I'm just asking specifically to this line here. So the answer is yes, you have achieved that. Since you filed this testimony, you feel that you have achieved increases in earnings that are required.
So since we filed the testimony, which would take into account the month of April, no, because of for multiple reasons, but one major variable being COVID-19.
Sure.
But up to the filing of testimony, we were hitting our hours and our milestones on a very macro level.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Mr. Chairman, I think you're on mute.
Thank you. With that, we're going to take a short 5-minute break. We'll be back here at 2:35.
Thank you.
Hey, Brenda.
Yes.
Before we start back, you want me to let you give everybody your suggestions for the sound getting better before we start back on the record?
Yes,